Yeah, if I may.
Yeah, it's recording now.
Oh, good. All right. And come on. There we go. Yeah, I started off a study from Hebrews to Israelites to Jews, how that came about, Edomites in the New Testament, and dark-skinned Hebrews, and took a look at different aspects of the Garden of Eden. Yes. So yeah, interesting to find anything on about skin color of the ancient Israelites. You actually had to. I stumbled upon it with the word ruddy, um, and two sources. The Zondervan, a word used to refer to a red or fair complexion, in contrast to the dark skin of the Hebrews. Um, and And the next one, yeah, the dark-skinned Hebrews found great beauty in a clear complexion. And again, this adds insight when reading the story about King David and Goliath. Looked at David, you ruddy boy, It was something. It was something different. It was something unusual. Of course, Esau was ruddy as well. And so it wasn't. Yeah, it was something abnormal for them. And here. What are we looking at? So Mesopotamia. So in Genesis 11:31, where God called Terah to take his son Abram, his grandson Lot, son of Haran, and his daughter-in-law Sarai, the wife of his son Abram, and together they set out from Ur and the Chaldeans to go to Canaan. But when they came to Haran, they settled there. And of course, Mesopotamia is known as the cradle of life. Um, Noah's Ark rested in, the mountains of Ararat. Not Mount Ararat as such, but the mountains of Ararat. And Terah got settled halfway from Chaldea or Ur to Haran. And then, of course, God called Abraham to go to the land of Canaan. One of the reasons I bring this up, because there's the 1836 research paper that into the inquiry of origins of languages about the Negro being the progenitor, basically, of all the astronomical knowledge of the Chaldeans, but they were. I'll just read it here. Rather to say, against the possibility of a Negro being learned and scientific, arising from an acquaintance from the present Negro character, I admit with great difficulty the theory of all astronomical knowledge of the Chaldees having been acquired or invented by his race, and that the Chaldees were originally Negroes. And so the question comes to mind, well, was Abraham just residing in Chaldea, or were they Chaldeans? And Josephus puts forth that the Hebrew people derived from the Chaldeans was clearly demonstrated. Abraham was Chaldean. And so what looked to have happened was the descendants of Shem, because Terah, the Bible noted that he was an idolater. He looks like the descendants of Shem had strayed away from God, but Abraham didn't. And there's this. I found a fascinating article from the Armstrong Institute of Biblical Archaeology that Abraham is known as, not just the father of nations, but also a scientist, mathematician, and astronomer. Ancient record speaks of an astronomer among the Chaldeans who had a special relationship with the mighty God. And so it kind of, it starts to fit, or more pieces to the puzzle together. And the article goes on that Abraham, through astronomy and science, was trying to get them back to Yahweh, and hence there's some I guess suspicion or that his brother was killed because of it. So he took his nephew Lot, because perhaps Abraham was not all that popular. He came under fire for this, and his brother died because of it. There's one hypothesis. This question was in my mind for quite some time, from Hebrews to Israelites to Jews. What happened? And so out of this world, what is it, for progressive Judaism, we were once called Hebrews during the time of Abraham, Sarah, Isaac, and Rebekah. After Jacob got his name changed to Israel and moved to Egypt, the people were called Israelites. This continued in the entire biblical period until Rome ruled over an area it called Judea, when we were called Judeans. There were a few instances of the word Yehudim, Jews, used in the book of Esther, but not enough to make it historical reality. So time of Moses, so on, known as Hebrews, and then of course Jacob, Israelites, but they strayed from God, and so they got split. After Solomon, they quickly got defeated once he passed, I should say, 10 tribes of Israel, and then there was the tribe of Judah and Benjamin, and so Israel was the first to get captured from the Assyrians, and there is no more. Theologians believe they just became assimilated with the surrounding people. So the 10 tribes, the general consensus is we don't know what happened to them. There's speculation, but the 10 tribes don't know. But the tribe of Judah went on further. They had more kings that followed God, and then they fell away again, and of course the Babylonians took over. They ransacked the temple, destroyed the temple, and the tribe of Judah became what's the right word? Captives, I guess, of the Babylonians. But there was a remnant. And at some point, they built another temple, and they started to become a small nation again. And so in the Old Testament, when, let's say, in the book of Esther and so on, where we read the word Jew, it meant Judahite. It meant a specific person from the tribe of Judah. All right. Same later on. The tribe of Judah, when they, later on in the Old Testament, when they had their own nation again. But in the New Testament, the word was Judean. So every time when we read the word Jew in our New Testament Bibles, it was the word Judean. This English word didn't come about till about 1275, and the word Jew that we all know now came about in the 17th century. I think it's important to remember that. And what in the New Testament, when we read the word Judean, it doesn't mean a person from the tribe of Judah anymore. There is that big transition. And Josephus, the first century historian, tells us that Hyrcanus, who is the leader of the Hasmoneans of the tribe of Judah, took also Dora and Marissa, cities of Idumea. Of course, Idumea is the Old Testament Edom. It's the Greek word for Edom. And so we got this transition from, because of the Romans, the Roman Empire, it became Hellenized. They took on a Greek culture and Greek language. That's why the New Testament manuscripts are in Greek. And they subdued all the Idumeans and permitted them to stay in that country if they would circumcise their genitals and make use of the laws of the Jews. And they were so desirous of living in the country of their forefathers, they submitted to the use of circumcision and the rest of the Jewish ways of living, at which time, therefore, that this befell them, that they were hereafter no other than Jews. All right, so now you got a Judean that could have been Edomite, not from the 12 tribes of Israel, but claiming Abraham as their father because they're descendants of Esau. And I think that is one of the most important historical facts that the Bible itself doesn't record, but it adds insight to the Bible. Because when Jesus was in front of the Sanhedrin, Herod, who was an Idumean or Edomite, he killed off most of the Sanhedrin, and so we got a takeover of Edomites. They basically took over Judaism. In 1804, that's an old commentary, 220 years almost. He highlights here that Idumea and Judea, or Judeans, became synonymous. Talking about Edom, afterwards they were conquered by the Maccabees. There were Israelites. They were from the tribe of Judah, but rather than quit their possessions, they submitted to circumcision and professed the Jewish religion. Thus, the Edomites dwelling in the southern parts of Judea were incorporated with the Jews, but the country which they had seized was still named after them, especially when the Herod family came to the throne, the first Herod being one of this nation. Idumea therefore comprehended not the ancient possession of the Edomites only, but the south parts of Judea. Afterward, our Lord's time, the whole of Judea was sometimes called by the Greeks and Romans Idumea, who name even the Jews themselves Idumeans, from the country which they possessed. So here, the Greeks and Romans, they just saw them as one people now. And so you could have been a Jew, now you're an Idumean, and vice versa. So it became this mixed race, and so when we look at Israel today, and or people that claiming, that they're Jews, well, it's a real broad definition now. I don't know if they got Edomite background, and particularly the dark skin of the Hebrews. It doesn't. So there was this takeover. Just at the bottom from the Encyclopedia Judaica, Idumea is frequently mentioned in Latin poems of the period, usually as a synonym. Oh, I can't even pronounce it. A synonym. Oh, too bad, for Judea. Synonymous. I can pronounce that, but I can't pronounce the other way. Yeah. So that's, like I said, I think it's one of the most important historical facts that enhances understanding of the New Testament. Any questions?
You know, you only dealing, you say only dealing with two tribes now, but in Revelation, they're all mentioned again.
Yes, they will be gathered. Yes.
Which is strange, doesn't it?
Where are the 12 tribes? Where were they dispersed to? And
Well,
the Bible
five,
says from beyond the land of somewhere in Africa. But it does actually give an idea where the 12 tribes are.
Because, most of the New Testament's on them.
Correct.
Not the other 10.
Right.
And yet it's
correct.
mentioned in the
Revelation.
Revelation.
Yeah.
There'll be 12,000 from each tribe.
Correct. Yeah, the 144,000. Yeah, but
Wonder where they're hiding.
yeah. So yes, I think there's something to it about the slave trade from Negro land, that they got dispersed around the world and lost identity. That's my hunch, and other people's theory, but we don't know, and till God comes.
How do they come back?
How do they come back then? That's the thing.
Yeah.
Well, they're the calling of God.
What that looks like and so on, I don't know.
You'll see 12,000 people, that's all suddenly it's time to go back.
There's something's got to happen for them to stir them up.
Interesting.
No, and I didn't learn about the Idumeans being the Edomites till just within the last few years, really, because you read about the Pharisees. The Pharisees conspiring with Herodians. You don't really realize that, hey, both of them kind of got Edomite blood in them. Stuff like that. Judas, he was from the southern parts of Judea. It was actually from Idumea. All the other disciples were from Galilee. He would have been Edomite, or very, very strong, highly likely he was Edomite. And so the Edomites, yes, descendants of Esau, Jacob's twin brother. So Jacob went on to be, the 12 tribes of, name changed Israel, 12 sons. So obviously Esau was not a part of this. He went off and married the Canaanites, and his offspring, they're enemies of Israel. They had a perpetual and everlasting hatred towards the Israelites. Esau was hated by God. Edomites were under the wrath of God forever. Chuck Missler points out, nation of Edom have more pronounced biblical judgments upon them than any other nation in the Bible. And so their arch enemies, they conquered, forced them to become Jews, and then they actually took over Judaism. Yes, the new God's holy people. Yeah. And so the Edomite takeover. So some of the Edomites obtained high-ranking positions: high priest, captain of the guard. I forgot and started to bring down the Hasmonean dynasty, which ushered in the Herodian dynasty, which was an Edomite dynasty. Herod was an Edomite, and he was king of the Jews. The most notable Edomite was Herod the Great. Herod put to death John Hyrcanus II. Herod also executed leading members of the Hasmonean dynasty one by one, and 46 members of the Sanhedrin. The executions included his wife, Miriamne, I don't know pronouncing that right, who was the granddaughter of John Hyrcanus II, and also killed his 2 sons by her. And so there was on 2 levels of well, yeah. So there's 2 levels of a takeover. One, Herod and taking over high ranking positions, but also the high priests, Annas. When Jesus got in the synagogue and turned over the tables and so on, Annas, he was the booths of Annas. He was an Edomite. They were corrupt, and Jesus, like, you put this synagogue, house of God, and into a den of thieves. Edomite background, and we don't really realize it. And the Pharisees, I'm not saying all the Pharisees were Edomites, but they were just a small group. I think it was about 3,000. Now, the Apostle Paul was a Pharisee, but he also points out he was a Hebrew of Hebrews and from the tribe of Benjamin. So he made a distinct clarification that, yes, he's a Jew, but he's also a Hebrew. The Pharisees, the most important of the three sects of Judaism was Pharisees, because they are the spiritual fathers of modern Judaism. Now, this is from the Jewish Virtual Library. So the group that Jesus talked against the most became, foundation for modern Judaism. Their main distinguishing characteristic was a belief in the oral law, the 613 commandments that God gave to Moses, which they believe, I'm not saying it's true, at Sinai along with the Torah. The written law, let me skip that part. The Pharisees believed that God also gave Moses the knowledge of what these laws meant and how they should be applied. This oral tradition was codified. And remember, Jesus specifically, he scolded the Pharisees for this oral tradition, and written down roughly 3 centuries later in what is now known as the Talmud. We haven't looked at the Talmud. We will. It is not a good book if you're not a Jew. All right?
If you're not a Jew.
It is. So Martin Luther, he translated it. He made it known to people. And he got chastised, saying he's anti-Semitic. He lost the plot at the end and stuff like that. He wrote a book called The Jews and Their Lies, and he got scolded for it. Now, I think there is just a small group I'd say stemming from an Edomite background. And that believed in this oral tradition, which Jesus, he said, "What are you guys doing this for?" And no, there's some horrific things in there. Jesus is in hell, boiling in human excrement. Mary was licentious with carpenters. So she didn't have sex with Joseph. On her wedding night, she had sex with one of his like a best man kind of thing, and so Jesus was a bastard. Stuff like that. It's horrific, and so we will look at it. But the current modern Judaism believes that's one of their foundational books is the Talmud, the Kabbalah, and the Zohar. So it looks nothing like the religion of the Hebrews. It's completely different. And again, Jesus mentioned against these Pharisees, your descendants, you testify against yourself that you're descendants of those who murdered the prophets. You called them serpents, offspring of vipers. How are you going to escape the judgment of hell? That's a powerful statement. All the righteous blood that has been shed on earth shall come upon them from righteous Abel, of course, who Cain killed. How is that possible? It is Zechariah, son of Berechiah. Who killed the prophets and righteous people? Sanhedrin condemned Jesus to death and ordered the stoning of Stephen. Herod, of course, was an Edomite, this is a different Herod, but ordered the death of John the Baptist. Old Testament, Jezebel, a Sidonian princess, killed many prophets after she married King Ahab. Doeg, the Edomite, killed God's priests under the rule of King Saul. And then we got into these John chapter 8, Jesus' big conversation, I guess, with the Pharisees. He accused them. He said, "Yeah, I know you're the literal ancestors of Abraham," but basically said your father is the devil. And then they respond, "We're not born of sexual immorality," which we went down the road of, well, was Jesus actually literally saying that there's offspring of the devil? A lot of this is double up. Adam and Eve ate fruit together, but Eve was beguiled. Beguiled had two definitions: mentally deceived or morally seduced. And I like this, the meaning of the statement, "What have you done?" It's a question and exclamation of horror. The same speech from the sailors towards Jonah when he was running away from God, and they realized that the storm was because Jonah was running away from God, and they exclaimed, "What have you done?" They knew what was going on, but how could you do that? And that's what God said to Eve. And I found interesting after in Genesis 3 that Adam renames his wife from woman to Eve because she became the mother of all living. For me, it was just another piece of the puzzle of what actually happened in the garden. And I'll put enmity between your offspring and hers. I think is quite a literal. I think the Bible's quite literal about it, or quite open what happened. What else? We looked at the angels that fell from heaven and took human wives, resulting in the Nephilim. Cain, not mentioned the descendants of Adam twice, Genesis and Chronicles. Cain is listed before the genealogy of Adam and without any ages given, which I thought was interesting. And his line was the first to marry multiple women and first commit more murder. We looked at that verse, and I think it's 2 Timothy, or maybe 1 Timothy 2:14. And Adam wasn't deceived. It was Eve was completely deceived and became involved in transgression. Which, the traditional view is a difficult time. If they both ate fruit, how did she fall into transgression when Adam didn't? I thought it was interesting about Noah, like the reason for the flood. I'll read it. Noah was a just man, perfect in his generations. This description of Noah was unique to him, not only refers to the righteous life of Noah, but also to the fact he was yet uncorrupted by Satan's attempt to sow a virus among the genetic pool of mankind. We could translate perfect in his generations as Noah was pure in his genetic profile. Again, another layer of understanding to the story of, in Noah's Ark, Noah and the flood. And so what does, when Jesus says, end of days, it'll be as in the days of Noah, also as in the days of Lot. Is there going to be another attempt at, tainting the genetic pool of mankind? Chuck Missler brings that up. Don't know. I did bring up, I'll stop. Anything from there or any comments? I brought up Tertullian because he's such a well-respected early church father. You know, he considered the father of Latin Christianity, and became a prolific Christian author. And this bit in his chapter 5 of this writing is called Patience. The woman immediately on being met by him, I may say so without rashness, was though, or through his very speech with her, breathed on by a spirit infected with impatience. So certain is it that she would have never have sinned at all if she honored the divine edict by maintaining her patience to the end. What of the fact that she endured not to have been met alone, but in the presence of Adam, not yet her husband, not yet bound to lend her his ears? And definitely, you know, almost 2,000 years ago, a greater understanding what happened in the Garden of Eden that, you know, that we're, you know, that we have is this understanding that one, their marriage wasn't consummated on the day that they were created. You know, it would have taken time. You know, it said, you know, she would have never sinned at all if she had honored the divine edict, go ye and multiply, you know. And we back this up where it says, not yet her husband. You know, they hadn't slept together yet. That was his understanding. And just like being met alone. And there is definitely more to the story, understanding 2,000 years ago than what we got. And another, the Gospel of James, well, not canonical, it was the oldest and most famous of the infancy Gospels, possibly written as early as 150 AD. Its popularity reflects in the fact that 130 Greek manuscripts which contain the Gospel have survived. And it had this story of Mary and Joseph, and about regarding Mary. Now it's just it's a story, but it lends an understanding to Scripture, what we've been studying. And she was in her 6th month, and behold, Joseph came back from his building, and entering into his house, he discovered that she was big with child. And he smote his face, and threw himself on the ground upon the sackcloth, and wept bitterly, saying, with what face shall I look upon the Lord my God? And what prayer shall I make about this maiden? Because I received her a virgin out of the temple of the Lord, and I have not watched over her. Who is it that has hunted me down? Who has done this evil thing in my house, and defiled the virgin? Has not the history of Adam been repeated unto me? For just as Adam was in the hour of his singing praise, and the serpent came and found Eve alone, and completely deceived her, so it has happened to me also. And this sentence that says completely deceived her, that's the exact Greek words that described Eve being completely deceived by Satan. And again, it has two meanings, you know, mental delusion or sexual seduction. And I put this in here because I believe the Bible already states it. It's just we're not taught it, and it comes across a bit like heresy, but there seems to be an understanding at that time that Eve was found alone and was deceived by the serpent, or more than deceived, but seduced.
Who's that one?
Sorry?
Who's you?
Gospel of James, not James in the book of the Bible, but they call them infancy Gospels. And I've put that in there. I had one of my old tutors said, hey, if you got, because I didn't put this in some of my papers because, it's not from the Bible. But he says, have you got supporting evidence for your theory and so on? Put it in. Just take note though, of the levels, different levels of what's the right word? Like, we know Scripture is God breathed.
Yeah.
All right, Tertullian, highly reputable.
Yeah.
Gospel of James, less reputable,
Yeah.
but still good source of information. But yeah. I'm going to get through really quick. We won't even. That's all right. I know we went through this a couple times. I'm not sure, Jesse, have you seen this at all? I'm not going to go through again, but just ask if there's any, or I'll make one comment. It's the line from the wife of Ham, from Ham and his wife. They're prolifically evil.
Yeah.
I mean, not a little bit, but it's like, what the heck?
Yeah.
So that's one thing that stood out. Yeah. And I'll point out again, 75% of modern Jews say that they're Ashkenazi, a descendant of Japheth. All right. So who's not obviously from the line of Shem.
Yeah.
And we'll look at that a bit later as well, because we don't think anything of it. Because I met a guy in a church too. He says, "Oh, I'm an Ashkenazi Jew." And well, do you know who Ashkenaz is? No.
Yeah.
It's we've come so many generations away, and we don't know until we actually start studying it and do separate lines from, this is a line of Jesus, through Jacob and Shem. You got, but anyways, so. Yeah, so anything from there? I'm not sure if I can add any more. President Netanyahu did mention about Amalek and the Amalekites. I don't know if anyone's picked up on that. But yeah. Oh, and then the last study, that was more of something to ponder. The Israelites were wandering in the desert for 40 years, and they made a tabernacle unto Chion. Moloch, a star, was possibly put on the head of the image, on the images of the idol representing Saturn, and then that's where this I forget the guy's name, Rabbi, believed that in agreement with all astrologers that this star was the Star of Israel, or what we know as the Star of Israel. And God, he scolded the Israelites for worshiping the star and making a little tabernacle about it and putting it on the foreheads. And it did have a meaning of protection, and so that was kind of a conclusion, or connecting the dots, the possibility of the mark of Cain, particularly if we go along with the narrative that Cain was, when God said to Satan, "I'm going to put enmity between your offspring and hers," and then if the numerical meaning of it is 666, it fits the narrative. Not saying it's not enough information to confirm it, so, but You think of all the flippin' pyramids around the world,
Yeah.
you know, and the meanings, or there's the specific design of them, and the ones, and they've been around for thousands and thousands of years. You know, how else do you end up with, you know, some that are underwater for, and so on. It's, yeah. There's a correlation, and just not quite enough information to connect all the dots. But so yeah, that was the review. I don't think I got anything else.